All right, so for this final part of the interview,
Yeah.
I went to a bunch of students who've already completed your course, Philosophy of Science and Ethics, The Microscope and the Elephant, and I asked them to think of questions that they would like to ask either about your personal opinion or just in general that they were kind of left with after the course.
Okay.
So they're going to be quite diverse. Some are quite random, but I'm hoping they'll lead to some really interesting philosophical concepts or understandings. So these are all questions from different students. So the first one is, do you believe in the institution of marriage?
Okay. Actually, the answer is no.
No.
So
Okay.
no.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, of course. I am married, and I think I'm a liberal. I'm not against it, but I think just any way that if people want to live together or not live together, and how many live together, and what sexually live together, that should completely up to them. It's completely private affairs. The only thing that we should be institutionalized is when there are children, right? So if there are children, they should have a safe surrounding and responsibility.
Yeah.
And maybe marriage is like a handy way to arrange that, but maybe not the only way. So, but I don't believe in the holiness of marriage, or relationship lasts as long as both or all partners want to have it last. Only children, of course, they are a lifelong responsibility.
So you kind of already led into the next question that was a follow-up is, what do you think about polyamory?
Well, as I'm a liberal, so I'm completely open to any kind of personal or sexual relations people might have. So I don't have, of course, I have a personal opinion on that, but everyone should be allowed to do it, what they want.
Okay.
And it seems like polyamory for some people, as I've seen from psychological studies, work for some, but maybe not for all.
Yeah. Yeah, well, they asked because it tied in with the concept of the institution of marriage, which is typically dichotomous. So quite interesting. In a totally different direction, what is your favorite book and why?
What's my favorite? Probably my favorite book would be Animal Liberation, Peter Singer, 1975, which is really a groundbreaking book in the sense that it started the whole animal rights movement or the animal ethics movement. So it's a philosophy book which has a huge impact on society and on the world. So the topic is relevant, one, the impact is relevant, two, but also the third point that it makes philosophy relevant. It makes it the idea that philosophy really applies to the world. So Peter Singer coined this phrase practical ethics. It's also one of his books. But before that, philosophy was really very much aloof and very abstract. And he made it to apply it to the real world. And that's really inspirational. So although I am an academic in a sense and an academic philosopher, I'm not interested in philosophy in an academic way, but to really change the world and to help to ameliorate the fate of victims and to make sure there are less victims in the world. So that's why and practical philosophy can help with that. And Singer's book is really an example for that.
So leading with the idea of practical philosophy and how that gets brought into the course, Philosophy of Science and Ethics, a lot of students are meant to kind of develop themselves and think critically about their own thoughts.
Yes.
So with that in mind, we had a student ask, how would you respond to a student who is offended at comments that his or her religion is unethical?
Well, it's all right to be offended. There's nothing wrong. It's not just meant at that person personally. I mean, ideas should be criticized, and people can feel offended when ideas are critically reviewed. But my criticism is not meant at any persons, but at the ideas. But of course, people have in their mind that if you criticize an idea, that they feel personally attacked. But that's, again, that's something maybe that people should experience. And maybe, and I don't. It's not my intention, but there's also nothing wrong if people are angry at me. So that's fine.
And in some aspects, it might even show them that it's important to be able to shake your own foundations to test how strong they are.
Yeah, so it's all right to be critically. I mean, the university is the place to be challenged, even if it hurts.
Yeah.
The philosophy hurts. I mean, I personally made tremendous changes during my journey in philosophy. Okay, I chose it myself, but sometimes it really hurts to have to change your ideas fundamentally. So
yeah. Okay, I like that. I like that. So then we had another student ask you, how do you feel about non-Western religions, namely such as Buddhism? Is it a religion, or is it ethical, or is your focus on religious talk more specifically to Western institutionalized religions or Abrahamic religions?
Well, I focus a lot on the Abrahamic religions, and I have to. When I studied at university, I studied Japanese language and cultures, and I had a huge interest in Buddhism, especially Zen Buddhism, and also I went to Japan and I also practiced Zen Buddhism. So that all depends on what is your definition of religion. But I think, and just meditating, of course, as a bodily experience is a practice which you can incorporate in your life. I changed Zen Buddhism for yoga, by the way, but that's a different story. Okay. But I think that Buddhism, in this way, is religious, that it makes non-scientific truth claims, in the sense from karma, the idea of enlightenment, the idea of eternal life, the cycle of life. These are truth claims which are not scientific, and in that sense, they are not true. So that's and the ethics of Buddhism. Well, maybe it's less unethical than the Abrahamic religion. But when I was in Buddhist countries in Japan, there was also a lot of taboos on sexuality. There was no equality between men and women, no gay rights. So, and religion is not, Buddhism is not on the side of the emancipation of these groups. So, well, they are vegetarians. That's so good, maybe better. But so maybe you can pick a little bit from this. If it helps you to inspire yourself, okay. But I think you don't need it.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
And so for me, it's also this two. As a philosopher, I have two focuses: one on ethics, but also on truth. So it can be ethical, maybe, or partly ethical. But if it has truth claims which are not true, then I also have an interest in the truth as it is, because it is the truth. I think the truth has intrinsic value. I don't believe in intrinsic value, but the truth has it.
Okay. So during part of the course, we also learn a lot about climate change and environmental ethics, sort of as we build up to it towards the end. And we had a student ask, how do you persevere in teaching this course with the view that the world is not really going to get better in terms of environmental sustainability, or the probability that it's not going to improve in time for us to make a real change? Do you struggle with that as a teacher, trying to promote positive change whenever it's not happening quick enough?
Well, it's psychologically, of course, it's a nightmare because that's also the reason that why I have specialized in environmental ethics is that I have an education in ethics and applied ethics, and when I was looking for focus, I was looking for, okay, where is the biggest problem?
Yeah.
And I think that there is a real biggest problem, and that is the continuation of a livable planet. And that is in danger now due to the ecological crisis, and it's not getting any better. But I still think we should do our utmost best. But it's the same like when we were in the Second World War before 1943, before the tipping point of Stalingrad, that you didn't know that Hitler would lose. People still believe in the resistance and tried their best to fight, because they want to do, it's the good thing to do. And here the same, we don't know if we're going to make it, and probably we're not going to make it, but we still have to try to make the best of it. Ethics is also to do with your personal life. How did you want to live your life? Do you want to be part of the problem, or do you want to be part of the solution? Mm-hmm. Even if you cannot guarantee that there will be a big final solution in the good sense. Mm-hmm. But it is a struggle, and especially in my master course, which only focuses on environmental problems, that it really also has a huge psychological impact on people. So it's also a huge struggle.
Yeah, a very big emotional burden.
Yes.
But an important one.
Yeah, well, it's not, I mean, you cannot ignore the truth, right? So it's just how it is.
So with regards to trying to build a better world, we had a student ask, how should we facilitate the ethical treatment of already domesticated animals that rely on human interference for survival and flourishment?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that all beings that we brought into beings, so including the domesticated animals, we have to take care for them as best as we can. Only not continue a new generation, so not inseminate them, not to breed them, but we have to not eat them, not slaughter them, but we, as it is at the moment we decide, and the moment should be now, that we don't maltreat them. We have to start to treat them as best as we can.
Okay.
And that will be a huge enterprise to do that.
Yeah, yeah. Now, with regards to trying to reduce harm overall, so not just with non-human animals, but also with humans, we had a student ask, if uncontacted tribes are living in an unethical life, so let's say there's sexism or there's killing of non-human animals or so on and so forth, do we have a moral obligation to interfere with them, but in order to promote a more ethical life, so inducing no harm principles?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, that's something that, when we look at the question from victims, the answer would be yes. Mm-hmm. But there's also no guarantee that they would be happy or survive if we bring them in contact with us. Mm-hmm. So if you look at the Indians or the Aboriginals, it's not so. But morally, the answer would be yes. I mean, if people are dying, there are children. The Yanomami, for example, they are a little bit in contact. But for example, they live in the Amazon rainforest, and they are covered with insect bites, and it's because they suffer from all kind of parasites, and they live a horrible life. And if we would give them medical treatment, they would really suffer less. Mm-hmm. And they also maltreat their women very much. So it's. Yeah, I think indeed I don't believe. I don't believe in the intrinsic value of cultures. Cultures do not have only they have value as so far as they do not harm each other. Huh? The Papuas, for example, are one of the most violent cultures in the world. The homicide among the Papua Indians in Papua New Guinea is tremendously high. So should we then just say, okay, that's okay? But if you go that line, people immediately say, okay, but look at the victims in all kind of dictatorships, and they are right. So if you pragmatically, that will be very hard to police the world. But ethically, I think the people who, if you can help others in not suffering, you should.
Okay. So with that in mind, you might have just answered it. We have a student that asked, what should be the goal of humanity?
I don't believe there should be a goal of humanity.
Okay.
I think there should be a goal. I think a world with less suffering and more happiness is better than a world with more suffering and less happiness. So I think that we should strive for. So not a huge end goal, but by piecemeal engineering, to use a phrase by Karl Popper, try to make, to alleviate suffering and to increase happiness, but in that order. So it's more, I'm more focused, I'm primarily focused on suffering and on victims, and secondary on happiness. I know that in popular philosophy and in popular psychology, many people are focused on happiness, and of course I'm happy if people are happy, and good that they can improve that happiness, but suffering is much more important. And you can see that if you are living a happy life, but if you have a really bad toothache, then all the rest disappears. It's not, I mean, you're only that pain. But when the pain is gone, then you can go on with the rest of your life. So that's why personally I focus my work on the suffering first. Try to help victims from unnecessary suffering.
So then this ties in really nicely with our final question. Pragmatically, is poverty in society inevitable?
Pragmatically. Poverty, well, what depends what you mean with poverty. I mean, relative poverty will always be there.
Of course. So maybe we should define it more as poverty to the point that it induces severe harm.
Yes, and I think that is what in a social welfare state you try to focus on, that people are not, they won't be rich, the poor people, but they won't suffer. So that's what we should strive for, and I think that we also have a moral obligation also to expand that beyond our national borders.
And would you also argue to expand that into all realms of sentientism? So not necessarily in the terms of poverty, but in terms of suffering.
Well, in order not to make other sentient beings suffer unnecessary. So I'm not in favor of policing the rainforest, because there is a lot of suffering in nature, but the suffering for which we are responsible and which is unnecessary, which is first of all the factory farming. So that's the easiest way that we can now, as humans here in our society, do to reduce the suffering is to get rid of intensive farming, because there's the most animals and the most suffering. So we live in a victim society with a huge amount of suffering, which is completely out of our focus. It's a blind moral spot. And in philosophy, and that's the power of philosophy, can help you find moral blind spots, and also to see that our intuitions are not necessarily good. So we have to test our moral intuitions, and that can be really a challenge. So it might feel strange, but I'm a philosopher and therefore also a vegan. So that's a necessarily where the argumentation goes, and that people think that's strange. Like we have this idea that some things are like a hobby, but veganism is not a hobby. It just follows from the logical arguments. And that's a struggle for the students to find out that my veganism is not my hobby, but it should also be their veganism.
Nice. All right, well, we'll end it on that. And thank you very much for answering this quite diverse set of questions.
You're welcome.